Hi, and welcome to Great Movie Scenes, the first series to discuss just that, great scenes from movies. I'm your host, Michelle, and today I am joined by Marty Lang. I just looked up your bio and it says you're a writer, director, actor, teacher. You're a lot of things.
I do a lot, yes. Yeah, I'm a film professor at the University of Memphis, and I also work in independent film. I've written, directed, produced, acted, pretty much everything. So yeah, I do a lot.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me today. We brought you on to talk about one of your favorite movie scenes. So can you just introduce us into what we're going to be watching here?
Sure. So my favorite scene is from my favorite movie, which is called The Big Lebowski. And this is the scene where Walter, played by John Goodman, has kind of a showdown with a fellow bowler about the validity of an over-the-line call, and things end a little bit differently than you think that they will.
Okay. All right. Let's watch it, and we'll be right back to discuss.
Woo! I'm slamming him tonight. You guys are dead in the water.
All right, way to go, Donnie! If you will it, it is no dream.
Fucking 20 minutes late, man. What the fuck is that?
Theodore Herzl. State of Israel. If you will it, dude, it is no dream.
What the fuck you talking about, man? The carrier. What's in the fucking carrier?
Huh? Oh, Cynthia's dog. I think it's a Pomeranian. I can't leave him home alone or he eats the furniture. I'm watching it while Cynthia and Marty Ackerman are in
You
Hawaii.
brought a fucking Pomeranian bowling?
Brought it bowling. I didn't rent its shoes. I'm not buying it a fucking beer. He's not taking your fucking turn, dude.
Man, if my fucking ex-wife asked me to take care of her fucking dog while she and her boyfriend went to Honolulu, I tell her to go fuck herself. Why can't you board it?
First of all, dude, you don't have an ex. Secondly, this is a fucking show dog with fucking papers. You can't board it. It gets upset.
Hey,
Its
man.
hair falls out.
Walter.
Fucking
no.
dog has fucking papers. Over the line!
Huh?
I'm sorry, Smokey. You were over the line. That's a foul.
Bullshit. Market 8, dude.
Excuse me. Market 0, next frame.
Bullshit, Walter. Market 8, dude.
Smokey, this is not Nam. This is bowling. There are rules.
Hey, Walter, come on. It's just, hey, man, it's Smokey. So his toe slipped over a little, you know? It's just a game, man.
This is a league game. This determines who enters the next round robin. Am I wrong?
Yeah, but I wasn't.
Am I wrong?
Yeah, but I wasn't over. Give me the marker, dude. I'm marking an 8.
Smokey, my friend, you're entering a world of pain.
Walter, man.
You mark that frame an 8, you're entering a world of pain.
I'm not.
A world of pain.
Look, dude, this is your partner.
Is the whole world gone crazy? Am I the only one around here who gives a shit about the rules? Market 0.
They're calling the cops, man. Put the piece away.
Market 0.
Walter, put the piece away.
Walter?
You think I'm fucking around here? Market 0.
All right, it's fucking 0. You happy, you crazy fuck?
It's a league game, Smokey.
Okay. So now that we watched the clip, tell us a little bit about why you chose this scene.
Well, I primarily work as a screenwriter, and I think this is a really great example of a scene that builds and then has a wonderful turn in the middle of it when you think it's going one way and then it goes another.
Yeah.
You have sort of the beginning starts when Walter yells out over the line. That's pretty much the beginning of the conflict there. And you think it's just going to be a regular argument kind of thing. And then when Walter pulls the gun out, it takes a completely different turn. And then you don't know where it's going to go from there. So obviously, it becomes a much more intense scene from that point on. And the ending of it is great, just with the kind of understated Walter. I just think structurally, I think it works really well.
Yeah, I mean, and quite honestly, like just being a kid for like in the 90s, I tend to think of John Goodman on the show Roseanne. But, I look back at some of the films that he's done, and he is just like a national treasure, to be completely honest.
He is. He's the definition of character actor. You see him in so many different roles, doing so many different things. And I feel like this is one of his standout major roles in film. A lot of the stuff that he's done with the Coen brothers have fallen into that kind of area, playing those really quirky kind of characters.
Right. I mean, and I was even thinking of Sea of Love with Al Pacino, and I remember watching that movie and just thinking like him and Al Pacino, like casting, it just didn't seem right. But then when you watch him, you're just like, you're kind of taken away. I mean, and I know that the film isn't, predominantly, about him, but I mean, he steals every scene that he's in, and this is no exception.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because you have a lot of you wear a lot of hats, and that's something that very much fascinates me. Just because a little bit about my background is I was a theater kid, went to acting school, and then I really realized that I was actually a writer. And so I started, writing screenplays. I've done a couple of indie films and whatnot. But I find it fascinating because a lot of like what you hear in the industry, mostly what you see is this person is just a director, this person is just the screenwriter, this person is just the actor. And then you start to see that actually behind the scenes, people are doing multiple things to get work done. I mean, I think about Tina Fey or, like Mindy Kaling, women who I look up to. Tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are. Did you start in, one arena and just kind of hopped around?
Yeah, well, I guess I could take this all the way back to high school. When I was in high school, I never had anything to do with the performing arts other than music. I played the saxophone, and my sister was actually an actress and still is.
Okay.
She won a National Musical Theater Award when she was in high school for a play that she did, and from then on, I was like, oh my god, like I was like really jealous of her. So when I got to college, I started looking a little bit more at the creative arts. I majored in journalism, and I ended up working for newspapers as a reporter after I got out of college. But slowly, I started getting into independent film. And the way, for me, the easiest way to get into independent film was just to kind of offer yourself up to do anything, just so that you can be in the room. And as I quickly found out, producing is one area where a lot of independent films often need help. So I started working in that context, and that started getting me work. It got me into graduate film school. And then when I got out, the production side was kind of where I lived. Even though I came from a writing background, with the journalism experience. So the more I did that, I did that for about 10 years, and really enjoyed it. Worked on a lot of great movies, a couple great TV projects. And then I thought, well, I think it might be time for me to make my own film. So then I wrote and directed a feature that shot in Connecticut called Rising Star, that you can actually watch on Amazon Prime. And once that happened, I started to think of myself a little bit more as a creative instead of a logistical business type person. And all along the way, I had acted in small roles and things here and there. But recently, in the last couple of years, I've really tried to focus a little more on trying to find acting work. I actually have an acting agent and a manager now, of all things. So it's really been sort of a gradual transition where I'll focus on one thing during one time, but I'm really always working in all of the areas that I can.
That's awesome. And just to kind of bring that, a little bit of your history back to the film that we're talking about with The Big Lebowski, I find it interesting because a lot of I don't know how to say it, like the general public when they think of movies, they think of what they go to see, at a movie theater. Now, more of like what's on streaming services that are like the first, top 10 choices. But people, in the industry, we live off of indie films because our friends are doing it, we want to support or we're in them or we're making them and, stuff like that. So like The Big Lebowski, how would you categorize that? Is that a major motion film or is it an indie film? And I didn't look back at like the demographics of how much it grossed or anything like that, but just like the general feel of it. What do you feel?
I feel it's got the excuse me, it's got the energy of an independent film. I feel the story of it is definitely kind of off kilter, relative to major studio releases that were happening at the time. I think the budget for the film was around $18 million, so
Oh,
it wasn't a huge budget in terms of Hollywood films. It did have an A-list cast. You got all the people that were in there. Um, yeah, I would consider it an indie film in spirit, even though it had its roots in studio film production. But that's sort of the brilliance of the Coen brothers. Like when you look at their films, they don't often resemble studio releases.
right.
So I think that's something that's a real strength for them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and like if you were to take this scene and to one of your classes, like how would you break it down for assuming that some of the students are not really hip on a lot of films or indie films or anything like that? Like how would you break down for your students like the brilliance of the scene that we just watched? Because I think, watching it, we watched it, it's comical, but I mean there's a lot going on underneath that I think you could really break apart. I mean, even the one line where he's like, "This isn't Nam," there's order here. I mean, that is pretty hilarious. So, I mean,
Yeah.
taking a scene like this and really dissecting it for your students, like what kind of approach like would you take?
Well, I think structurally, I think would be the first way. So, like I talked about at the beginning, just sort of showing how the conflict presents itself, how the turn happens, and how things get more intense, and ultimately how it's resolved. That would be the first way that I'd look at it. I think looking at particular lines, like that line, Smokey, this isn't Nam, it's bowling. There are rules. Not only are those lines hilarious, but they reveal character. Like that's something you learn over the course of the film, that Walter is sort of defined by his experience as a soldier in Vietnam. So that really reveals who he is, in addition to being a hilarious, line of dialogue. You can also look at it from a directing standpoint. The positioning of other characters in the scene, I think, can reveal things about them. And I think of two characters when I think of the scene. The dude, first of all, right? You have him sitting back in this chair, legs wide open, just totally not a care in the world. And that really is emblematic of his journey through the whole movie. He just kind of goes along with things and does what he wants. And I think that's another interesting thing with this scene in particular, because even though the dude is your lead character of the movie, he's not the character driving this scene. And that's something you see a lot over the course of that film, because the dude is just such a passive character. Like he does things, but a lot of times he's sort of reacting to what other people are doing to him, and sort of carrying the story along with that. You can think of him kind of like as a stoner version of Forrest Gump,
Yeah.
right? Um, and the other character who's pretty interesting in this scene is Donnie. Even though you don't see much of him, at the very beginning of the scene, he leads it off with the strike. He gives that great line, you guys are in trouble tonight. And then he sits down. And if you look at the way that he's framed in the scene for the rest of the scene, he's in the back while Walter and the dude are having their conversation, and eventually with Smokey. So subliminally, you're getting the idea that he's not as important sort of in this triad, right? And as the film goes on, you realize that that's the case. So there's a lot of different things. The idea of the dog, I think, is obviously hilarious, and that whole conversation about the dog before Smokey goes over the line. But that's a great plant, because when Walter has the gun to Smokey's face, you hear the dog barking like crazy, and it's funny, but it also adds to the tension.
Right.
Because you don't know what's going to happen. It's one of these moments where you're kind of gripping the seat and laughing at the same time. So it's another really good example of structuring and laying things out so that they sort of build throughout the scene. So there's a couple different ways you can look at the scene.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and I guess how would you, because I've been fascinated about this for a while, just in general, but I'm just wondering like what your approach would be from being somebody in the industry and also teaching about the industry. When the film came out, like it it was well liked, but it certainly has garnered a kind of cult following, as the years have gone on. And I think of other films like Scarface. It was obliterated when it first came out, by the critics, but now it's this like renowned loved film. If you can't tell, I'm obsessed with Al Pacino because I've mentioned two of his movies already. But with a film like this, like is there an approach that you take with your students as well of how to view film through a certain lens for a certain time, and realizing that it might not hit when it first premieres, but there's definitely still going to be a following? I don't know if I'm articulating that properly, but I mean, are you able to teach your students, or show your students with examples like this film, that film kind of lives in and throughout time, essentially?
There are multiple sort of present times that films have to live through, right? And so teaching a film in the context of when it was released can really do a lot to help students not only understand how it landed when it came out in that time, but also in a historical context and kind of what the world was like at that time too. The film came out, I believe, in 1998. And a big focus of this film that you hear multiple characters talking about is the presidency of George H.W. Bush, and sort of, things that were happening around that time politically. So that's something that I do talk about a little bit when I mention this film. It's been interesting since the film came out. That political context has become less and less relevant for the people that have become passionate about it. And I think really any kind of cult film has sort of these quirky elements, these sort of off-kilter elements that people can respond to and identify with. One of the things that's been really interesting about The Big Lebowski is that there's been this almost cottage industry of screening events all around the country. They're called Lebowski Fests.
Nice.
And they're crazy, and they always take place in bowling alleys, and they include costume contests. So I went to one in New Jersey a bunch of years ago, and what happens is they screen the film in the bowling alley, and obviously everybody's watching it. And what's interesting is the first time you see a character that you've dressed up as for the costume contest, you walk to the front, right in front of the movie screen, and everybody gives you a round of applause. So I think what's really connected with audiences since the film came out is these really specific, really unique characters that people can identify with and that people can, sort of claim as their own, right? So you have, like, whenever the one in New Jersey that I had gone to, there were probably 12 or 13 people who dressed up like Walter, right? And the crazy thing is, half of them actually kind of looked like Walter. So there's that real kind of personal connection with stuff. And obviously there are people that come up in a lot of different costumes and stuff based on other characters in the film. And some of them are very minor characters, and, some of them don't even speak, that kind of thing. But I think as time has gone on, I think it's really been the identification with these really specific characters that's created that kind of cult status for the film.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a film. I haven't watched it in the full film in years, but I do remember the first time I watched it, just kind of being like confused. I think I was about like 15 or something, and I'm just like, what is going on? Like, it was just, it was pretty crazy, and a lot to digest. But as I've gotten older, I mean, and I feel like this way for a lot of people, you could watch a film that you watched 10 years ago, and you watch it again, and it's a completely different film because just of life experiences and all of that.
Yeah.
But as I think we all are growing, especially how the industry is growing, and we're seeing new mediums, streaming services, like I said, we're just looking at content in a different way. And something that I've really kind of wanted to focus on is things that I've not been a part of. So like lighting, as you can tell, my lighting is not great right now, or sound mixing, things like that. So I'm really kind of focusing on things that I know nothing about, just to see how it changes the way that I'm viewing something. So because
Okay.
you have had your hand in a lot of different pots through the industry, when we look at a movie like Big Lebowski, we can say it's the actors that really pulled everything off. You could say it's the writing. Without the writing, the actors couldn't do their job. You could say it's, the directing with, the Coen brothers. I mean, you could say all of these different things. If you had to pick just one, though, just one, what would you say made the film what it is? Is it the writing, the directing, or the acting? And this is so unfair because we all know it has to be all three for it to be perfect. But
Yeah.
if you had to pick just one.
Well, I tend to believe that it all starts with the screenplay. That old, excuse me, that old phrase, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage. I think this is a script that is so witty, so subtle in its humor, still, structured perfectly fine. Like, you can see the beats of a normal, kind of detective whodunit in this. It's just with the half spin on it that it's an LA stoner, as your lead. You think of a film called like The Long Goodbye. That's a real good sort of comparison, I think. to The Big Lebowski structurally, obviously not tonally. Yeah, I really think that it's the script that really pulls it together, because these really specific characters and these really specific moments wouldn't exist if they weren't on the script first. I read a great interview with Jeff Daniels, and he had, or Jeff Bridges, and he had said that the script, all the way down to every comma, every man, it's all written. So he didn't have to worry about coming up with anything on his own. That was all there. So I think, given what a unique kind of film it is, I think it's the script that really pulls it together the most. Obviously, that, you know, all the other crafts had a big hand to do with it, and I think the acting was phenomenal in this. You know, from the stars all the way down to the smaller actors. But I think it's really the script that where it starts.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, and not just because, you know, I'm an English major and I think that the written word is so important, although I do. But no, I mean, I would agree. I mean, I think that there's when watching the film, it feels like there's definitely parts of it that feel improvised. So I mean, for you to say that like everything was written out, I'm very surprised to hear that, because a lot of it just kind of felt like this organic something that just happens in the moment. So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm surprised to hear that. But I mean, you hear about all of these instances where just something happens on set and they film it, and that's the thing. So I mean, it's definitely like a mixture of it. There has to be something going on with the actors, with the director, with the writing for it to all work. I mean, we all know that for like a film to be garnered as successful, it has to be kind of like lightning in a bottle.
Yeah.
Although there's plenty of films that are bad that are still good movies. So I mean, I guess that's like another question that I would ask, is that I think a lot of people, like when this came out, a lot of people were just like, this movie's weird and just I don't get it, you know. But those kind of movies tend to be the ones that we remember. Even if you didn't like it, you're still thinking about it and you're still talking about it. So what other kind of films do you suggest to your students, that are they along the same vein, or do you just have like an array of different kinds of films that you suggest for them to watch and dissect?
Well, I actually don't go over Lebowski very much in class, to be
Okay.
honest. I try to focus a little bit more on contemporary films, because I know those are films that students are more connected with. I do use small pieces of Lebowski in certain contexts. A lot of what I do is I try to show films, whether they're indie or studio or somewhere in between, that really do something differently. And that can be, it could be structurally. I used to show a film called Run Lola Run. That's kind of broken up in almost like into chapters, almost like a video game. You know, that's one great one that I show a lot. What are some of the other films that I'm big with? I show a film called Tangerine that played a couple years ago at Sundance. That's actually a film that I show not so much from a content perspective, but how content, or how the production process informs the content. So if you're not familiar, Tangerine was the first feature film that was ever shot with an iPhone. And that story, that particular story of trans Black prostitutes, is such a specific story about such a specific underserved community. There's almost no other way that story could have been told, because nobody would put resources into it. So that's the way that almost had to be told, by taking advantage of that new technology. So I do talk a little bit about things in those contexts. Strictly from a creative context, I mean, I show Pulp Fiction. I talk about that a little bit, again, in terms of sort of like nonlinear structure. I show The Wolf of Wall Street as an example of editing, because that was the fastest 3-hour movie I've ever watched in my entire life. You know, so there's different types. I play a film called Gravity to talk about sound design, because that was all put together, you know, to create a feeling in space. The sound designer Skip Leavesay, I actually saw him speak in New York, talking about how he put that together, and sort of, you know, some of the influences that he had and things that he wanted to get across, and working with the director and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's a number of films and a number of different contexts that I talk with students about.
That's awesome. Now, just to ask you a really quick question having to do with like your producing side. When you go into producing with, I guess my question would be, how do you decide what kind of projects you want to be attached to? And what I mean by that is a lot of the times we tend to, well, I'll speak for myself. I tend to get in a loop of watching the same kind of films like over and over and over again because I'm just in that mood. But as a producer, you have to kind of, look all across the gamut. So with your films that you've traditionally liked, um, I'm guessing you like an array of different films like the ones that you just mentioned with your students. But what is the producing process when it goes to, because you're going from being, a writer, director, you're an actor, all of that. Now going behind, the scene, I can
Yeah.
imagine it would be a little bit difficult. Is that true, or was it an easy transition for you?
Well, I mean, I started producing first, so that was sort of the first set of skills that I got. I don't think it's that big of a transition to move in front to behind the camera, or from directing to producing. I think ultimately the same jobs have to get done
Yeah.
by those two people every film that you work on. So knowing how one works can only help you in the other. But it's interesting that you asked that, what kind of projects I like to produce. I had thought couple years ago that I was into comedies and into dramas, and that was it. And I thought that was the only stuff I would ever produce. I'd work on short films with friends and stuff as favors, and those could be any kind of films. But in terms of the features that you really put time into, I thought it was all comedy and drama. But then my producing partner, Sarah, she said to me, we were working on a film together that I can actually show you the poster for right there. It's called Chompy and the Girls, and it's actually a horror thriller comedy. So it's more of a genre film.
Mm.
Um, and I got involved with it at first because Sarah, we had worked together before. The director was really nice and I thought really had an interesting story to tell. But as the film was getting made, I started to realize the thing that drew me to it was that this story, even though it's this crazy horror thriller with aliens and all kinds of special effects and stuff like that, the story is really about a woman who's struggling with mental illness. And when I realized that, I mean, I knew it as I was reading it, but it took a little while for me to realize that that was what drew me to it. Then I started looking at my other films, and every single one of them was about someone who was dealing with either a mental health or some kind of physical health issue through the course of the story. That includes another film that I'm producing now called Uniball. It's crowdfunding on Seed and Spark right now. It's about a young man who gets testicular cancer, and he has to actually have a testicle removed. But it's really about him struggling with, the embarrassment and the shame, and those kinds of things, and living with his girlfriend who's also going through it with him. It's kind of a mental health story, even though it's a physical health story. So that, I think, really is what I get drawn to in a project. And I didn't even realize it until, just recently.
Wow, that's really awesome. Because as you were saying that, and I was thinking more about the themes of The Big Lebowski, it's not just a comedy. It's not just this throwaway stoner film. So, I mean, I think you've been on to that for a while, I suppose. And yeah, I mean, you just, maybe realizing it now. But I mean, I feel like a lot of us tend to go down that road of like we're watching films, oh, because it's entertaining, maybe, but we're not realizing that some of the things that we're watching are actually like, no, this is hitting me in a very visceral way. Like you watch something and a week later, all of a sudden you get like this feeling of like, oh, wait, I get what that movie was about. Okay.
Mhm.
And I think that that's really just a testament to film and television is that, not everything is what it seems. And I mean, definitely The Big Lebowski is not just a throwaway stoner film for sure. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I mean, I think, you picking that, I'm definitely going to want to rewatch that film now again for sure. So thank you for picking that.
Yeah,
Um,
of course. Yeah.
yeah, and thank you so much for joining me today. It was really great talking to you. Thank you for joining in to Great Movie Scenes, the first series to talk about just that, great scenes from movies. Thanks again for my guest, Marty Lang. I'm your host, Michelle, and we will see you next time.